Welcome to SETA for a timely panel on Turkey's elections that took place on Sunday. Just a brief note, I think everybody here followed the elections. It was a stunning election, actually. It was surprising for everyone. Failed most of the pollsters, actually, other than one, it failed everyone. Even the AK Party was not expecting, I think, such a stunning victory. Got 49% of 49.4% of the votes, 9% higher than the June elections, and 4.5 million more than the June elections. So every month, when you divide it, every month it increased its votes by 1 million. And it was a colossal failure, loss for the opposition parties. MHP, which was starting from the June 7th, actually, was having a very uncompromising attitude, was punished by the voters. It lost 4% of its votes. And throughout Turkey, in most of the places, MHP lost a significant amount of MPs and votes. The second loser of this election was the rock star of the June election, HDP, which was considered, as many people considered, it would be a continuous trend that HDP would be increasing its votes, but the period between June elections and November elections, they gave up the concept of Türkiye'leşmek that they stick up so well in the the campaign of the June elections, and they also lost 3% of their votes. And most significantly, I think many people after the June election was considering, especially the Kurdish votes, would be now in HDP, and the loss is permanent loss. AK Party will not recover from these Kurdish votes, but AK Party recovered most of these cities, actually. Around southeastern cities, we see an average of 10%. In some of the cities, like Şanlıurfa, we see 17% increase in AK Party votes. And CHP become now it will somehow become really boring to talk about CHP. It is constantly between the 25-26 range. It is not increasing. They tried hard in June elections, but lost some of their votes. In November, they increased their votes by 0.4%. So this was not expected. After 5 months, we now have a single-party government again, and we will discuss what lies ahead in Turkey, especially in terms of the government and domestic politics, the discussions about the constitution, and finally the foreign policy, especially in relation with the United States. We have a distinguished panel today. We have Robert Wexler. Congressman Robert Wexler is the president of Daniel Abraham Center for Middle East Peace. We have Burhanettin Duran. We are fortunate to have him today here. He came all the way from Turkey to be in this panel. He is the president and general coordinator of SETA Foundation. And finally, Kadir Ustun, executive director of the SETA Foundation. We will start with Burhanettin Duran, and we'll get a perspective of what happened in Turkey when we were discussing the elections in the United States.
Thank you very much, Kilic, for giving us a brief summary of what happened in the elections. So I can focus more on the conclusions to be drawn from this election.
I think they need you to talk louder.
Okay. I can focus more on the conclusion to be drawn from these elections and what lies ahead in terms of domestic politics in Turkey. You know, I should start by confessing that I was one of the people that didn't know such a result, such a surprise in these elections, because I was expecting 44 or 45 for the governing party, but almost 50% is another result that we will be discussing today. You know, this period between June and November for 5 months in Turkey is exceptional, is very exceptional. maybe Turkish political students will and scholars will discuss it more and more. What happened there? People changed their votes from governing party from as 9%, and after 5 months they came back. So this is very exceptional, not in terms of Turkish politics, but also in any democracy. You cannot do that just within 5 months. So this is very particularly related to what Turkey experiences in the last 2.5 years. After 2013, there is an era of turbulence in Turkish politics, starting with this, Gezi protests, and later 17 December operation, and later Kobani protests. So this came, this period of exceptionality came after this political crisis. So now we are after November elections, and is this a normalization of Turkish politics to make Turkey more stable and to change political system from parliamentary one into a presidential one or semi-presidential one, or is Turkey being capable of solving this Kurdish question, and what kind of impacts can this results make on Syrian crisis? Well, for AK Party, of course, AK Party proved to be the major alternative for government, because opposition parties were able to AK Party down from single party government in June elections, but they were not able to propose a workable solution to the issue of government. I mean, no possibility of coalition. That was the major issue to be exploited, to be used by the AK Party, and AK Party was successful in doing that and proved to be a source of stability, and in terms of politically and economically. And again, the struggle with the PKK and parallel structure is another point that made AK Party successful. So, in my personal interpretation, these elections proved us the failure of bloc politics on the side of opposition. They couldn't create a coalition, but at the same time, they didn't keep their ground against AK Party. So this politics of bloc, of anti-Erdogan, anti-AK Party, is less influential than before now. Will be less influential than before. I don't mean that there is no way for continuing with this politics. There will be, but after these elections, with less impact, with less influence on voters. Well, AK Party made some dramatic changes in its policy regarding making economic promises to different parts of society. And again, the return to AK Party, the return of Kurdish voters to AK Party was very significant. And Kilic summarized the failure of MHP and CHP, MHP and CHP. MHP gave us the example of Mr. No, actually. No everything, no to everything, no to coalition, no to minority government, no to elections. So electoral support that MHP takes from people is very related to being in power, or to want to be in power. That's why MHP lost 4% to AK Party. For HDP, the problem is about peace, public security, and the issue of terror and violence. The PKK narrowed the space, political space given to HDP by voters in terms of making new positive developments on Kurdish demands. So that was the problem faced by HDP. So, what lies ahead? I think the major problem for Turkey now is to make a new constitution. This constitution has to have some elements, or what kind of elements, for a change from parliamentary system into what? Or to fix parliamentary system. We have two options. One is to fix system, because after 2007 presidential election, there is no way for direct election of president. This creates a big impact on the system. This is an urgent need of fixing a new political system into a new one, or to live with the problems of this parliamentary system. What kind of problems? First, the harmony and power sharing between president and prime minister. Whether they are Erdogan, Davutoğlu, Gül, or others, this is a big problem, actually. You know, politics is politics, and actually it should be considered as structurally, not personally. Maybe they can have good relations, but for the conduct of the system, this creates a huge problem. So just after the elections, politicians or analysts started to discuss this presidential system, whether Turkey will continue with a de facto semi-presidentialism or create a new one to discuss what kind of presidentialism, or as I said, fix it into a British type parliamentary system. So this is the main agenda of Turkey, and it seems that it will continue. What kind of scenarios can we have on this issue? Well, one is the continuation of this de facto semi-presidentialism under Erdogan's leadership. Yes, Davutoğlu proved to be successful in these elections, but still Erdogan has the clear prospect of being leader in terms of AK Parti's voters. So, and again, he is a politician. He wants to be elected in 2019 elections. So there will be a continuation of his influence on the voters. For first option can be any possibility of making presidential system, a change to presidential system. But you know, AK Party's MPs are not enough for doing this. Can there be a coalition between MHP and AK Party to do that, to make it an issue of referendum? Because their MPs are not enough for doing this. They can bring the issue to the referendum. Another option with HDP, but I don't expect such a collaboration neither on the side of HDP nor MHP. I'm not optimistic about this. So we will discuss it. Maybe between 2015 and 2019, we will discuss the issue. But any change in the system is not easy, actually. But you know, 2019 is the time for 3 elections in the same time. So all parties, opposition or governing parties, would be preparing to their final phase or final challenge in these elections. They will try to get the support of people for these elections. So maybe this 2015 elections were critical, exceptional, but 2019 will be more critical and more exceptional than before, than any elections. So all parties will be preparing for the 2019 elections domestically. And the opposition parties will continue to criticize the government of being authoritarianism or anything else. But for the conduct of the system, they cannot be effectful for making any change. And this issue of harmony between Davutoğlu and Erdogan for AK Party own domestic politics is very critical. You know, this discussion by some journalists, Erdogan is leader and the success belongs to Erdogan, or after these elections Davutoğlu became a leader and he's the leader of AK Party. So with for the same party with two leaders, this issue of harmony is very critical actually. For Kurdish question, for the time being, or for a period of 1 year, I don't expect any attempt to make a resolution process again with the PKK or HDP. There can be democratization perspective regarding Kurdish demands or Alevi demands or any other issues of Turkish politics, and the AK Party will be doing that or should do that. But for resolution process, Turkey is in a place that AK Party cannot do it just by starting or backing or starting backing. You know, this is enough for Turkish voters. There should be a final one for the resolution process. And for 2019 elections, yes, we have time, but 4 years. But at the same time, we are not sure whether these 3 elections will be held at the same time. So all parties should be ready for this, and because of this reality, I expect some reforms for Kurdish people, but not a process of Kurdish resolution. Of course, the U.S. has a stake here, and we should discuss it in the field of foreign policy, but maybe in the Q&A session. For Syrian civil war and its impact on Turkey, Turkey will be so much focused on what the PYD is doing in Syria, in northern Syria, because this is a very critical issue for Turkish security, public security, and foreign policy future expectations. So, and I expect that Turkey will be more effective in dealing with the future of Syria more than before, because there is a clear, stable government. There would be a very clear, stable government, and maybe a clear attempt for more operation against ISIL, and Turkey can make some operations against ISIL that they may influence the future of Syria in the near future. So yes, these are made points that I have in my mind. Maybe I can make more statements in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Congressman Wexler, how about what lies ahead for Turkish-American relations after these elections?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. A strong, confident Turkish government is potentially very advantageous for American-Turkish relations. Whether that potential advantage and collaboration occurs is disproportionately related to whether President Erdogan is a gracious winner or not. Very few heads of state get a second chance to, in effect, lead their nation from a position of confidence. President Erdogan has that opportunity. After the original rounds of protests, I guess almost a little more than 2 years ago, my view was at that time that Prime Minister Erdogan had the opportunity to become one of, if not in a very small class of leaders, the most consequential people of our time. And what I meant by that, or what I hoped, was that having transformed Turkey, and whether you agree with Prime Minister, now President Erdogan or not, whether you share his philosophy or not, whether you identify with his level of religiousness or not, there are certain things that I think are beyond debate. And what is beyond debate is that under Prime Minister Erdogan, now President Erdogan's leadership, Turkey went from a economic basket case with extraordinary inflation, little hope for young people, even the brightest young entrepreneurs, to a society of extraordinary economic output. You look at Istanbul and Ankara just as cities and compare them today to what they looked like 15 years ago, and there's no comparison. The bustling nature, the vibrancy. I have had the opportunity to talk with young people at different stages, many who don't align themselves politically with Prime Minister President Erdogan, and their view, their perspective, while still quite critical, their view of their potential actually speaks volumes about what Erdogan has achieved. And he is now at this point, having, in my humble opinion, failed after the protests. When the protests happened, I hoped that a confident Erdogan would say, listen, to both the Turkish people and to the world, here's what I've accomplished. I'm awfully proud of it. We haven't completed the job, but I understand there are some people in my country that have a different perspective, and I'm not going to only respect it, I'm going to put it on a loudspeaker, because I'm so confident that my leadership of Turkey has been so successful, I'll debate anybody. And he's got this extraordinary built-in advantage. Let's be realistic. 2 of the 3 political parties that you mentioned have dismal political leadership. They are not charismatic. They don't engage the Turkish population seemingly in any political way that would be successful. So he's got the field to himself. So in the category of Erdogan versus Erdogan, I had hoped that Erdogan would be bigger and would extend the olive branch, open up freedoms, and then challenge Europe and say, look what I've done and look how I react to opposition or crisis or criticism. And now my case for becoming a part of Europe is even stronger. Okay, that didn't happen last time around. He's got another chance. Now, I'm not myopic. I don't think this is all or nothing. But you can't have stories of the curtailing of media freedom. And I'll assume that there's merit to them, but I'll also assume there's another side to the story. You can't have a democratic NATO ally shutting down media outlets on a broad basis. That just doesn't wash. But more importantly, why would Erdogan find that necessary at this point? He's been given a stamp of approval, and he ought to run with that stamp of approval, and he ought to focus on the fight against the PKK. He ought to focus on ISIS, because that's going to be a treacherous problem for Turkey, as it is for so many others. And of course, above everything else, focus on additional economic reforms, pressure Europe to open up different chapters of the accession talks, pressure America to pressure Europe in that direction. If the United States and Europe can reach a trade pact, Turkey deserves effectively to be a part of that trade arrangement. Anything less would be a disrespect to the importance of the American-Turkish relationship. And I'll stop with this. Two other items. With the recent announcement of President Obama of just a small number, but we all know what is about to occur in terms of American troops in Syria. For America, our Syria policy, while seemingly just an evolution, potentially changed dramatically. And what is now 50 troops on the ground, I think it won't shock anyone that a year from now it may be a more significant number, and whoever's elected president next year will probably need to reevaluate the strategy and probably will need a more robust strategy in terms of defeating ISIS. So with now an additional number of American troops, special forces on the ground, our commitment, what's at stake for America, has changed dramatically. This is not an academic exercise. And while America must and should respect Turkey's interest with respect to the Syrian Kurdish question, at this point now, it'll be required that America and Turkey, but Turkey's going to probably have to give a little bit more now in terms of finding that sweet spot where collaboratively we can take the fight to ISIS and also take the fight to the PKK in a way that at least is somewhat consistent, at least not adverse to the fight against ISIS. It's not an easy balance, but it's a balance that can be struck. Last comment, in terms of American-Turkish relations. It hasn't been mentioned, but Turkish-Israeli relations have a disproportionate impact on American-Turkish relations. And the one area in which President Erdogan can reverse the negativity with such ease is to just closet the outrageous comments. He can be critical of Israeli policy if he wishes. That's legitimate. But you cannot be a serious international leader and engage with Hamas, for instance. You know, it's interesting. The PKK under American law is a terrorist organization, as it should be. So is Hamas. And yet Hamas now, for all intents and purposes, is anchored, or at least some of its political leadership is anchored in Israel. You cannot, as the leader of Turkey, criticize Israel in a credible and legitimate way when you have become, in effect, the primary or one of the primary hosts to a terrorist organization, Hamas. And it's not just that they're a terrorist organization, but in principle, they oppose a two-state solution, Hamas does. In principle, they are committed to the destruction of a UN nation, Israel. So if you want to be a serious international statesman, if you want to be a really reliable ally of the United States of America, sure. If you want to criticize Israeli policy in Gaza and talk about what you perceive as the humanitarian conditions, go for it. But it's got to be done in a context of seriousness. And at times, unfortunately, that has not been the case. So I'm also hopeful that with this new election, new mandate, new confidence, that President Erdogan and his most senior people can, it takes two to tango, and the Israeli government at times is not always so helpful, but they can repair those relations. And if they do, Turkish-American relations can take a deep breath. And relations on Capitol Hill will become better and easier. And when the Pentagon wants to provide more advanced weapons to Turkey, as it should, as we must, to have this joint fight in Syria, both against ISIS and against terrorist organizations that endanger Turkey, you won't have pushback on Capitol Hill like at times we see now. Thanks.
Thank you. Kadir?
Thank you.
From Turkish perspective, Turkish-American relations.
Yes. These days, the Turkish foreign policy's almost exclusive focus is on Syria and what's happening with PKK across the border in Iraq as well. But it's instructive, Syria story is instructive in terms of understanding U.S.-Turkey relationship, I think, because it's kind of diverged and then it seems to be coming together again, at least to some extent. But if we talk about past 3 years or 4 years, initially both the U.S. and Turkey endorsed the same policy, asked Assad to step aside. They were concerned about a potential civil war, and they tried to mobilize the international community, the UN sanctions route, etc. It didn't quite work. But once the conflict turned into a civil war, and once you started, especially the insertion of Al-Qaeda elements in Syria, it became more of a terrorism concern for the U.S. As opposed to an opposition versus regime kind of dynamic. And then Turkey continued to sort of support the opposition, and the U.S. did as well. But there came a point that the U.S. policy wanted to, especially June of 2004, as of 2014, June, when ISIS stormed Mosul. As of that time, it's been almost an exclusive focus for the United States. Whereas by then, Turkey was looking at the Syria situation as a matter of refugees, border security, PKK affiliate PYDs gaining ground in Syria. So there were multiple things when Turkey was looking at Syria that it saw was of great concern. The U.S. was, I'm not saying U.S. was not concerned, it's just that U.S. policy became more constructed around the, how to sort of defeat ISIL eventually. And at that point, the United States, today too, that's how they seem to see it, they see partners on the ground taking the fight to ISIS, at least limiting ISIS expansion at first, and then eventually defeating ISIS. So these local actors, among them is PYD. The U.S. has made a distinction between PYD and PKK. That distinction exists to some extent, a small extent at least, for the U.S., for the Turkish government, I should say. But essentially, they see PYD, PKK collaborating, their people sort of waging the war on the ground, trying to hold territory in the name of PKK, and arms going back and forth and that. So that's the Turkish perspective on it. The point, the gist of the story I'm trying to tell is both the US and Turkey don't have a fully sort of complementary view of the Syrian conflict. They're more concerned about certain aspects of it than others. That doesn't mean there's no common ground. And I think there's a lot of common ground, actually. So especially with the ISIS's bombings in Turkey, and past year and a half, Turkey has been pressuring ISIS at home, working against their financial networks and other issues. But at the same time, Turkey's support for the sort of legitimate moderate opposition it sees as moderate opposition, that has continued, and that drew criticism from the West about allowing fighters into Syria. So that policy has tightened. It's much more focused, I would say, on ISIL and PKK, and but Turkey is concerned about the political aspirations of PYD in northern Syria, and I think the U.S. is quite aware of that as well, but they see it as I guess less of an evil than they don't see any other partners working against ISIS. But this is a potential source of sort of disagreement and put a risk in U.S.-Turkey relationship if, let's say, PYD did something across, Euphrates River, went west, Turkey conducted some sort of operation, either directly or through some sort of proxies, that can create difficult situations in the U.S.-Turkey relationship. But I think there is a way for both countries to come to a better common ground on that. What happens with the Kurdish question, as Burhanettin Duran was talking about, that it's been for a long time a regional issue, and it will continue to be a regional issue. So if Turkey can at home make advances, take some initiatives towards democratization, then its fight against PKK at home and across the border will be definitely more effective. but if not, if it can't, if it's unable to, because we have the 50%, we have the majority government, etc. But remember, we had that before, before June elections, and because we didn't have a constructive opposition in Turkey, you had the 50%, but nobody to collaborate with. And if that continues to be a problem, if the opposition doesn't sort of change its approach to burning long-term issues such as the Kurdish question, then we won't be able to get a new civilian constitution. We won't be able to address some of the Kurdish sort of aspirations at home, or democratic rights at home. That will complicate Turkey's sort of Kurdish question, and that will have a regional component to it, which it has always had. And one last thing, the talks brokered by Russia in Vienna, etc. If there is an international approach, there's an agreed upon approach to Syria, I think that will have a spillover effect to U.S.-Turkey relations, how they see Syria as well. That can be also helpful. If that diplomatic track fails completely, like it has in the past, we'll have more difficult situation ahead, I think. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Before opening the floor for questions, let me abuse my role as moderator and ask a few questions to the panelists. The first question is, I just want to follow up Kadir's statement about the opposition and how opposition failed to be an alternative, actually, create a bloc or create a government in this inter-election period in the last 5 years. And we see that, especially during the election of the Speaker of the Parliament, we see that it turns into a fiasco. They start to blame each other. And now, after they lost their votes, especially MHP, HDP claimed that it's a major victory. MHP basically said the chairman will not resign, right? And CHP said, it is okay, we got some votes. But what we are seeing at this point is it can be a threat for Turkish democracy, the lack of opposition, the opposition problem in Turkey. It has been talked about for the last 3 years, 4 years, that even about the Gezi Park, that the fact that the street politics started in Turkey is as a result of the lack of confidence of the voters to the major political parties, opposition parties. So what do you see the future of opposition in Turkey, which can be really influential for Turkish democracy at the same time?
Oh yeah, well, this problem of lack of effective opposition in Turkish politics is serious, and I think it will continue to be in that way. Why? Because the major source of their political capital, is anti-Erdogan and anti-AK Party. This is not enough to make coalition. This is not enough to make opposition parties in power. So they have to find a new way to make an opposition to AK Party. So this should be on issues regarding Kurdish issue, democratization, and economic development and foreign policy. But if they combine all of these issues under the package of anti-AK Party, anti-Erdogan, they cannot make it workable. They cannot open the Turkish system. So this is one point. And another point, all these parties have to criticize themselves, have to make an internal critique. Why didn't we got these votes that we received from AK Party voters just in 5 months ago for HDP and MHP? Why we have lost now? So, but there is 4-year period, so it's not easy to make them a critical, but at the same time more appealing political program to the people against AK Party. So I don't expect so much change in the opposition. But more critical than that, what about the problems of Turkish democracy? Can there be a collaboration between the governing party and and opposition parties in solving these problems to make a new constitution and others. I'm not so much optimistic actually, because all of the parties will be preparing for another struggle to come after 4 years. So there can be some progress on democratization, whether supported by opposition or not. But at the same time, the issues of foreign policy will be more critical. And if Turkey, if the AK Party tries to be more effective in Syria, this will create, again, internal critique, domestic critique by opposition parties. Even if there is a collaboration between the US and AK Party, then this would create problem on the side of opposition. So they lost momentum. It's not easy for them to gain again this momentum. We will see.
Can I offer just a quick? I'm not Turkish, so I don't begin to understand the dynamic of domestic politics. But in the United States, from 1968 to 1992, the Democratic Party suffered loss after loss after loss. With the exception of the Watergate year, we won nothing. In Great Britain, the Labour Party in a similar period of time had dismal election results. What did it take to reverse the trend? It wasn't, in America, the Democratic Party couldn't run against Reagan and be successful. And in Great Britain, what happened was, of course, Bill Clinton and Tony Blair created a new Democratic Party and a new Labour Party. And what essentially they said was, we're going to take the good things about our history and that which energizes our base, but we're also going to try to steal, and I say that in a positive way, steal some of the successful attributes of the other party. And they then created national consensus and victories for the Democratic and the Labour Party. So if I were advising the CHP, which of course I'm not, but if I were, what I would suggest to them is you need, first of all, to get a new generation of men and women in your leadership. There should be a man and a woman, or several, in their 40s that say, okay, we respect the history of our party, and here's what's right about it, but here's where we need to do things differently. And if I had to make a guess, the group of people that I'd go after are the women who vote for Erdogan's party, because, especially the younger women, because I suspect that there is an inkling or a sense that while, yes, I'm comfortable with the future of Erdogan's party, there may be some parts of that future I'm not so comfortable with. And if there was a successful woman in her 40s or man that could speak to that constituency, I think you could have a totally different dynamic.
Yeah, there was something to add. A good advice to opposition leaders, actually.
Well,
they should listen to you. But at the same time, Turkish politics is a multi-party politics. They are stuck with the issues of identity. So, this in this period of 5 months, we have seen that opposition parties were critical of themselves at the same time. They are not just criticizing AK Party, but at the same time, they are criticizing themselves. So it's not easy for them, but they should find a way that fits your advice.
Yeah. Hopefully, but it is things that make me pessimistic about this. It's a good advice. The elections is becoming almost a referendum. Is it AK Party or not? Right? Because what we see some plans, programs of AK Party, even in their election platform. Then we are seeing that, like the criticism of that, but the electorate is not seeing any kind of possible alternative. Especially these 5 months was one of the most destructive moments for the Turkish opposition was this last 5 months. That basically they demonstrated some kind of incapability even to work together among themselves, right? They were giving multiple messages, they were blaming each other. So it created some, I understand that, but one thing that is more important than generational difference is that generational difference shouldn't be a young man with old ideas. Right?
Of course.
So it is, we have a new generation. They tried CHP, somehow tried to create new CHP, distance itself from this hardline secularist rhetoric, but when, like at a certain point it stops, and they have too much baggage, I think, in Turkey to do that. You want to add something on that?
Yeah, I thought Congressman's remarks touched upon two major things in electoral politics, which is leadership and then targeting a certain socioeconomic realities of the society, not simply keep it at a level of, rhetorical level of of something, anything. And I think those were crucial in the past 2 years. We saw, for instance, CHP leadership, when there was an AK Party Gülen split. Actually, when we look back, we see that they misplayed that the whole way. Because this was Gülen movement was rejected by the society. Otherwise, people would have voted against that party. But CHP did not quite have a positive agenda on that, and they appeared to be simply siding with them. And in the coalition negotiations since June, also they kept shifting their positions on whether they would go visit the palace of the presidential palace, and then they backtracked, etc. But that shows they kind of did not rely on a full-fledged agenda of their own, and then make compromises based on that. But rather, they were trying to respond to criticisms about themselves, which is, they were criticized for being ultra-secularist, so they brought in some covered ladies, so to draw votes. But they were not systematically targeting a socioeconomic segment of the society, as you were describing. And media became too much involved, actually, partly because of the failures of the opposition as well, because media was trying to fill that space that opposition wasn't able to in many ways. So they came too much forward into the political fight, and then they became parties to this political fight, which meant there was very little room for press freedom. So let me leave it at that.
Last question of mine is actually for Kadir and Congressman Wexler at the same time. My favorite quote about Turkish-American relations is from Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, when she said Turkey and United States have strategic convergence but tactical divergence. So it was somehow underestimating the impact of tactical divergences. So what we see since that statement is we see some kind of disagreements in Egypt. We see disagreements and disappointments about the red line statement. We see disagreements in Syria. Later we started to see disagreements in northern Syria and Kobani incident. We started to see these statements, senior White House officials stating that they are frustrated with Turkey, and it created these small tactical divergences. On top of that, rhetorical ambivalence between two countries, leaders of two countries, started to create this situation that right now, do we still have strategic convergence or not? Or can we have the strategic convergence in the next 4 years or not? You have 1 minute. Go ahead, Kadir.
There's going to be an election in this country, and we're going to have another president in 2017, January. That I think if it's a Democratic president, if it's Clinton, then I think you'll have a president that will know a lot about Turkey, and we might have less of those strategic less of tactical divergences. I think the U.S. policy under President Obama, how he sees the world and how he would like America to be less involved, pay less penalties for sort of engagements abroad, and take less risks. That has a spillover effect to its relations with not only with Turkey but many regional actors, as well as big actors like China and others. So what kind of a approach are we going to see next president? Will they be more sort of for engagement abroad? Are they going to go for a no-fly zone in Syria? Are they going to try to push back against Russia? And those things will, I'm sure we will
So
definitely
you
have
don't
more.
accept anything for the next 1 year?
Well, I think Iran, Syria, as long as this diplomatic track continues, we will have more sort of tactical convergences than divergences. But the PKK issue will pull it one way, and for the next year, I think that's going to continue like that. With a new president, those realities won't change, but the approach may change. So how that will affect the relations, we'll have to wait and see.
How about
Assistant Secretary Nuland is a very smart, shrewd woman, and she did the wise thing. Whenever you have differences with an important ally, you say our strategic aims are the same, we just have different tactics. And that's, in fact, the case. But I would characterize possibly the Obama administration a bit differently.
Sure.
It's not about employing less risk. It's about employing smarter risk. And what we see in the United States, if I could sum it up in a simplified manner, is use Iraq and Libya and Syria as examples. In Iraq, we went in with everything. Troops, hundreds of billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of troops. And what do we have? We have an Iraqi government that's more closely aligned with Iran than with us. Not a grand success. In Libya, we do kind of a hybrid. We go in with air power, we take out the leadership, we don't put troops on the ground, we do it with the French, we do it with other allies, and well, we got rid of the guy like we did in Iraq, but what are we left with? Not a lot of success. Now in Syria, we go completely the other way. We don't put in any troops until now. We don't invest an enormous amount of resources until now. And what do we have? The biggest humanitarian crisis in this century and going back to World War II, and a complete abdication of leadership, and we all understand the scenario. So we have three different examples, all of which haven't worked out particularly well. So the lesson, I think, in part that has been learned is, one, an abdication of leadership. When it occurs, that void most likely is going to be filled by actors that are adverse to our interests. So if you're going to talk about Assad leaving, and this isn't directed at Erdogan or Obama or any individual leader, but if you're going to talk about Assad leaving, you better very well know what comes after. Because history has shown us what comes after, unless you've got a really fail-safe plan, isn't going to be any better and is likely going to be far worse. The next president, whether it's Hillary Clinton or one of the Republicans, and I happen to think it'll be Hillary Clinton, but whether it's either or, I suspect what will happen is, with President Bush, the pendulum swung all the way that way. With Obama, it swung all the way another way. My guess is the next president will be somewhere in between. Maybe that'll be the sweet spot for American-Turkish relations.
Thank you.
Let's hope.
Let's hope so. Any questions? I'm opening the floor for questions. Yes.
Hi,
Identify yourself.
absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Utsad Yadav. I'm a senior research fellow for a nonprofit called Stability Institute. And this is just a question for everybody on the panel here. Now that Erdogan has won, he's won with a landslide in this election, what is the future of secularism in Turkey? And I say that because I've read and I've come across this term, this phrase called the Pakistanization of Turkey. Sort of a scary concept. Obviously, news media agencies tend to blow this concept out of proportion in some way or form. But my basic question is, what is the future of secularism or relative secularism that has defined Turkey for a long time?
Yeah. Well, this term of Pakistanization of Turkey is so much related to become a real front and target of different Islamist organizations, whether they are mobilizing some of their capital, human capital from Turkey, and or directing their terrorism to Turkey. Not about secularism. Actually, in terms of secularism, Turkey is somewhere now, I should say, accomplished. You know, in the past, Turkish radical secularism was directed to French type. After AK Party, it has become more Anglo-Saxon. And so this issue of religious education, of Imam Hatip schools and headscarf issue, these are all about problems of democratization or meeting people's demands. Now there is no more prospects for Islamization in Turkey. Even AK Party is very critical of, very concerned with its base, conservative base, losing some ground to secularity, not secularism, but secularity, to secular type of life. Such a conservative concern may be understandable, but this is not an issue of Islamization anymore for Turkey. Of course, some people are critical of this, but in terms of real developments, in terms of sociology, demography, people's dynamism, and cosmopolitanism came out of economic development and others. So this is not an issue of concern in Turkey, in my sight. But this Pakistanization issue is very much related to instability created in Syria and Iraq, and the threat of ISIL is becoming, or other some radical organizations are becoming more influential within Turkey. So in the last operations against ISIL, it is clear that there is some background, some level, some support given from people to ISIL, and even the ISIL make Turkey a target after the passage given to Peshmerga, Kurdish Peshmerga to Kobani in 2014. After then, the ISIL planned targeting massive attacks Turkish cities. So Turkey has to deal with this critical problem.
You want to say a few words about the geopolitical side of Pakistanization, maybe?
Well, just maybe I'll defer to the Turkish experts, but from afar, my observation is Turkey probably wasn't as secular in the past as people suggest that it was, and it's probably not as Islamist today as some of the, particularly the detractors of the Erdogan government would suggest it is. However, if it is true that Turkey continues or goes too far in that direction, well, then that's a perfect scenario for the CHP, if they're smart, not in a radical way, but actually in a modest, very moderated way, to engage the voters of Erdogan's coalition, who in fact are quite modern in their perspective. And I would suggest, again, probably young women fall into that category, particularly young women who have some degree of education, but are from families that are conservative or traditional. If the AK party goes too far in that direction, it would seem to me there's a potential for a political earthquake in the center. And that's where the opponents should focus. Again, not with a radical message, but with a message almost like the AK party left you, and we're trying to find space, common ground for you. But I think from an international perspective and an American perspective, this often gets quite confused. Because for Americans, freedom of religion is a universal point of view. Nobody differs. And we don't understand the headscarf debate. We have no understanding of why somebody wearing a headscarf in a school or a university should be a controversial thing. But obviously in Turkey it takes on an entirely different debate. So for Americans it's quite confusing.
Thank you.
The Turkish economy has been stagnating for the last few years. the lira depreciated at least 50% in the last year, I believe. Do you think this is going to change, and if so, when?
Are you directing someone or?
No in particular.
Well, because of this issue of political instability especially in the last year, there are some signs of stagnation, but still Turkish economy is vibrant and dynamic. And after this single party government, there will be some reforms, continuation of some structural reforms. So I don't expect any problem, any crisis on the side of Turkish economy. This issue of government will recover the recent problems.
If I could make a suggestion, if I were advising President Erdogan and Prime Minister Davutoglu on this question, I would say, here's your Achilles heel. If this economic performance continues, it doesn't matter whether people think you're Islamist or not, or all your successes are not in Syria, you're going to lose, and you're going to lose big. So here's what Turkey, I think, ought to do. You have this blossoming potential in terms of energy in the Mediterranean. Turkey is the natural course for that energy to get to Europe. In order, of course, for Turkey to become the 800-pound gorilla of the energy industry, you've got to resolve the Cyprus question. And you also have to differ your behavior with Israel. And it is only an inch away, if everybody's politics could just get out of the way, for Turkey essentially to play the lead in creating what I would call a loose energy union between Turkey, Israel, Cyprus, and Greece. And you could take that uneven or pathetic economic performance and make it into a vibrant performance in a matter of months. And it would create such energy and such a positive international environment. Investment will come flowing in, and it wouldn't be a hard thing to do. And at the same time, you have the potential, again, whether one supports the Iran nuclear agreement or opposes it, Iran is poised, if they follow the agreement, to become a part of the international economy again. Turkey is poised to take advantage of that in a very significant way. So Syria is going to be a disaster for a long time. Who knows if Iraq will ever get on its feet. But Iran has this enormous potential, the energy in the region, enormous potential for Turkey, and these are the kinds of things that a confident, stable, strong Turkish government ought to be able to engage in a very positive way for the Turkish people.
Go ahead.
Just a few words. It's going to be harder because the global economic situation is not that great, hasn't been that great for the last several years. The growth rate in Turkey and lira's depreciation have a lot to do with the global economic situation as well. So Turkey now, it has a stable government and it has these opportunities in the region, but it won't be as easy, I think, as those years of sort of 7-8% or more growth rates, because the global wave is not going towards that. The European economy is not that great right now. So
China
we'll
is not
see.
doing that great.
China is not doing that great. So it's going to be harder to put it all together.
The other factor that Turkey can't control, but it can take advantage of if the international environment got better, was its economic relationship with Russia. Now, who knows if Putin's going to continue on his path of isolation, or maybe his participation in Syria, if it can be constructive, will allow for Europe and the United States, I'm not so optimistic, but allow for a relaxation of sanctions. And if that happens, again, Turkey has an enormous opportunity to regain its economic relationship with Russia.
From what you said, actually, I see that Turkish economy is pretty sound, when you take into account the economic sanctions for Iran, right?
Yeah.
Economic sanctions to Russia.
Right.
There is a war with Ukraine. There is two civil wars in Iraq and Syria, and these are the borders. And the bankrupt country, Greece, on the other side.
Yeah.
So I think, when you look at this geopolitics, it is fairly sound, at least for
Yes.
fiscal discipline.
More reason for Turkey to repair its relations with the one other economy in the region that's humming, which is Israel.
I got that point.
But the point here, to get some good relations with Israel, may be a goal for Turkish government as well. But the problem is here, for example, for Cyprus and for the relations with the European Union, I expect some new developments after this new government. But for the relations with Israel, when there is a conjuncture to get good relations with Israel, it is being somehow distracted by Israel itself. You know, the operations against Gaza and others make it more difficult to find a new chapter.
Sure, and this isn't a debate about Israel, but you don't have to tell anyone who's allied with the Obama administration about difficulties with relations with the Netanyahu government at times. I understand that it can be frustrating. But on the other hand, with all due respect, in terms of Gaza, there isn't a country in the world that would stand idle while a terrorist organization lobs dozens upon dozens, hundreds of bombs into your civilian cities. Turkey wouldn't stand for it, America wouldn't stand for it, and nor should Israel.
Let's get all these questions together. Let's start with you.
Mr. Wexler, how do you think the U.S. administration should deal with the Russian presence in the area? I mean, can you foresee some actually foreseeable, hopeful scenarios?
Okay, Rich Johnson, National Defense University. This is primarily for Kadir, but whoever else wants to answer, please do. A big part of the divergence on Syria has been the U.S. Perception that there is no real opposition to build on except for the Kurds who are fighting on their end. I think Turkey's been working on some projects with Ahrar al-Sham and the Jaish al-Fatah and other groups. Is that going to continue, trying to build these into some sort of a credible opposition, and is that seen as a viable project by the new government?
There was a third question. Yes.
Building on Congressman Wexler's point about Erdogan's choices, which Erdogan will emerge, really ground for you. Do you see any possibility of a reinvigorated approach to the Kurdish question on the part of Erdogan in collaboration with Demirtas and the HDP, and having that as a very, I mean, this is really breaking the forms in some way, but a way that they could have a de facto understanding about the new constitution and an emerging presidential system or what have you in trade-off for one and the other. The bottom being a new Turkey, cosmopolitan, inclusive of all elements and traditions within it. Do you think that's within the AKP ideological frame now?
Let's start with Kadir. Syria, and Kurdish question.
Russian president.
Russian president. Syria.
I think, again, the course of the conflict was such that there arguably, we can sort of argue counterfactually saying if we intervened at a certain point of time and empowered the opposition and gave it arms, etc., how could that play out? We don't know that at the end. But for a variety of reasons, foreign involvement, their own ineffectiveness, the disagreements between regional players, etc., we don't have an opposition that can even hold its own territory that all that much. Now there are new facts on the ground. There's, Nusra and ISIS, and then PYD that Turkey is having a hard time with. I think Turkey has been, for a while now, doing sort of being content with what it has through the groups you mentioned and sort of Turkmens and others. And I think the 2-3 years ago, the vision was there would be regime change and there would be a process for democratic. So now we are much more minimalistic in many ways and much more sort of realistic we are doing with what we have on the ground. So I don't, unless, the West comes together and says, forget about Russia and Iran and we will build an opposition, we'll invest all this it was never in the cards Turkey could do it on its own, I think. So from here, whatever opposition we have and we have left, I think diplomatic track, they'll expect that to be but they will continue to support those groups. But I think Turkey's expectation from them is now different. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, yes, without solving the Kurdish question, Turkey cannot be a viable democracy in the long run. And again, Turkey, if Turkey wants to further its own interest, national interest, Turkey should have this card of Kurdish question in the regional level as well. This is one side of the coin. But we have another side. Erdogan was very risky, made a very risky decision in initiating this resolution process. And after all what happened, I think Erdogan drew some conclusions, some lessons from this experience. The first one is, without any solution to Syrian crisis, you cannot continue with the negotiations with the PKK. You know, PKK is taking a very strong support internationally from an international legitimacy level, or armaments, or some political advancements in northern Syria. Syrian case is different from the northern Iraq for Turkey, because there is a continuation of the same demography, less or more, with the southeastern of Turkey. And then taking some good relations with US, Russia, Iran, and Assad regime at the same time for PYD or PKK. It's the same for Turkey. So you cannot persuade the PKK to make disarmament. So I think the government, Erdogan, will wait for some time to make another attempt. It may take time. I don't know how long it will continue, but for the short time, I don't expect any initiative, because there are many lessons to be drawn from this. Erdogan lost its support. AK Party lost its support among some Kurds and Turks, and that was clear in June elections. They don't want to repeat the same thing, and they want to be clear, confident that PKK really will decline arms. But under these conditions, under these current conditions, well, is there anyone who persuade me that PKK will be willing to do that in this region, in the Middle East? That's my point.
To the gentleman's point on American-Russian relations, so long as President Putin continues with what appears to be an aggressive expansionist policy, I'm afraid we don't have an overall strategy that will lead to a happy result. What we can do in the interim, though, which I think can actually help the overall strategy, is to compartmentalize our relationship with Russia and to engage with Russia where we can in a constructive way. For instance, on the Iran nuclear agreement, Russia was a positive actor. It didn't stand in our way. It actually added to a positive discussion. There's no reason in the world, well, there are reasons. Hopefully, the Syria balance will be worked out so that 6 months from now we can say that Russian engagement wasn't a treacherous addition, but wound up to be a factor that allowed a political resolution. That remains to be seen. But what we also have to do in the interim is we've got to bolster up our allies. We need a bigger muscular policy, in my humble opinion, in the Baltics. We've got to calm fears in Poland. We've got to show a bit of strength in Romania and Bulgaria. Countries like Georgia that are right in the middle of this tug of war, we've got to pay, meaning America, we've got to pay greater attention to it. Otherwise, they'll lose just by the case of too much weight on the other side. At the same time, though, none of us should be naive. So long as President Putin continues to see the Russia-America relationship as a zero-sum relationship, we win, they lose, he wins, we lose, we're not going to be able to deal with the man in a totality of success. He's got to come to a conclusion in his self-interest that losing that zero-sum analysis is in his interests. That is a big, tall order.
So no reset.
No reset, but I think what we do need to do is understand, to the degree we can, Putin's mentality, which, if I understand it correctly, is, for instance, when we went into Libya, he thought we completely abused the UN resolution that allowed us to go in, and that we used Russia, we diminished Russia. What we've got to do, without sacrificing our, more importantly, our own allies' interests, is give Russia some stature, give Russia a place at the table in a manner in which Putin believes they deserve. Do it without compromising our interests, do it in a way that advances our interests. It's not so easy with a man that sees it in a zero-sum balance.
Thank you very much. You want to follow up? We have like 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Just to Burhanettin Bey. Now that we have the party experience over the last 13 years, and they've come up to 49.5% at the last election. And what do you think the solid party votes come out of this 49.5? What are the consigned votes, let's say, out of that?
Well, it's a very difficult question because, you know, AK Party came from some national view origins, milli görüş origins, but for the voters, some people talk about 25 or 30 solid voters support, but others, 10, 15, sometimes more than that, may fluctuate from parties to others.
Can I make this
But it
question
depends.
easier?
Yeah.
What is the swing vote?
Swing vote.
Yeah.
Well, 10% actually. It was clear in June elections. For the time being, 10%. But that doesn't mean that for the next 10 years, AK Party may easily take 40 or more than 40. Because if you, what's critical for AK Party, which is not seen in Turkish history, AK Party changed the takeoff or the flight going down to up. This is not known. This is not seen before. This is very critical. But this is made under these current conditions. For the next 10 years, we cannot expect that AK Party will be always above 40. We don't know that.
But there are still, usually there are still untapped votes.
Yeah, there can be some opportunities to take 10%.
Okay.
Yeah.
On that note, I want to thank you for the panelists. Please join me to thank them. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.